Today on the Bookcase Build series, we are starting to cut the rabbets in our shelves so that we can start building the structure of our bookcase. If you can see off to the side of me here, we've already started with 2 shelves. We've got that done. We've got 1 shelf to go, and then we've got our support pieces to cut. Let's get into it. The shelf is going to have a rabbet cut in it. If you remember from the previous video where we cut the dados, what we're going to do is cut the shelves to be a 1/2 inch thick on the sides and then a slight little step up or almost a rabbet cut in the side that will slide into these dado grooves. You see the one here, I've already done it, where it slides in and the front here matches up to the edge of the dado that we cut, or the end of the dado that we cut. That's why it was real important to make sure that those ends were saved to last and cut perfectly square and crisp lines so that these butt up to each other and look really well, or look well together. So I've got it clamped up here right now. I've got the bottom shelf in and the middle shelf. Today we're gonna do the top shelf and then this supporting piece. If you can see here, we've got an 1.5 inch piece of 3/4 inch stock that we're doing the same 1/2 inch rabbet on, and that's running along underneath the shelf. What that's giving is really good support. So over time, as heavy books are put on this or whatever else gets put on this shelf, this bottom piece here will help support that weight so that the shelf doesn't bow over time. What that also gives you is a little bit of top space. So as we cut that 1/2 inch rabbet out of the side to go into the dado, that gives us a little extra stock on the top. That gives us the ability to sand this down or plane it if we need to. If we get dings or dents in it during the construction phase or whatever, as we're building it, we can sand or plane those out and not worry about messing up our gaps as it goes into the dado cut. This is the side of our shelf. This is the dado groove that we cut previously. So the first thing we want to do is the depth of this cut that we did in our dado, we want to mark on the board, on the top of the board. So from the edge of the shelf over on the top is how much we want to mark the depth of our dado. So as this goes in that dado groove, that's going to be the thickness that we come out. Now, from the bottom of the shelf to and up is how much we want to cut our 1/2 inch groove. So we're taking our measurements from the side over to get the depth of our dado, and we're getting the thickness of the dado from the bottom up. So we're registering from the bottom of this dado groove up to the top 1/2 inch. We do that because we want that remaining stock on the top so we can sand our show piece down, plane it down, whatever we need to do. Plus that extra little bit of stock hides any gaps that we might have if we chopped our dado a little bit weird, or our thickness is not quite down to it, we maybe take a little bit too much off of the 1/2 inch. That extra stock will hide all that and make sure we have a nice uniform clean cut all the way across and it matches up nicely. I happen to have one of these marking gauges that also can kind of work as like a depth gauge as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this up against the groove here in the dado, and then I'm going to press that down, make sure we're firm against it, and that's going to give me the depth that I need to mark on my board. Now, if you don't have a marking gauge like this, you can use your square. So you just take your square, press it up the same way, make sure you're firm against it and that you're flush against the board, and that gives you the depth of your dado as well. You can now take this and transfer it onto your shelf. I've got my depth gauge set to the depth of my dado. I'm just going to come in on the top here and score my line. Now, if you do have a marking gauge and you're saying mine doesn't look like this, it looks more like this one. This is a more traditional style marking gauge. And what this does, it's the same concept as the other one with the wheel, where you have this kind of arm that goes in and out and you set it to your depth. You can tighten it down and get your exact measurement. But with this one, instead of a wheel on the end of it that cuts, this one has just a little nail sticking through, a piece of metal sticking through that's been sharpened down, and you can pull it along and make your mark that way. You won't be able to do what I just did to get that depth cut down perfectly where you can press this against it. What you'd have to do is take your measurement with your square or whatever, and then come in and set that depth with just measuring it on here. Then once you've got that depth measured from this surface up to the edge of your marking nail or whatever, that piece of metal that's coming through, then you can drag that along that edge of that board and make that mark as well. Once you've got your mark defined with your marking gauge, then you can come back through with your layout knife or your marking knife, whatever you want to call it, and define that edge a little bit more. So light passes the first few times. Once you get it down, then you can come through a little bit heavier and really define that knife wall. So we've got our line for our depth. Now we need to set the thickness of our dado. So we're going to flip the board over and go from the bottom, and we're going to come up a ½ an inch from the bottom and mark our line across the end grain. I like to set mine just a hair over a ½ an inch, and that will give us the ability to work down to it and have a nice tight fitting shelf into the dado. And it gives us a little extra meat if we cut down to our line to be able to just fine tune that fit as it goes into the dado. So we've got that marked. Again, if you don't have a marking gauge, you can do all this with a square. It just is a little bit easier with the marking gauge. So we're going to take that from the bottom of our shelf now, press it down, and run it along that end grain. So you can see it a little bit better. So right here is our line. All this stock right here, we need to remove up to this line here. So kind of the same process as before with cutting our dados into our sides. We're just going to come through and use our 1-inch chisel to kind of define that wall a little bit better. So we're just going to pare down right up to our knife wall and coming back, kind of using your thumb, flicking out all that waste. So now that I've done that, what I can do, instead of having to come through here and chisel down or pare down like this, what I can do is just take my chisel, and I could go right into my knife wall here and just tap it and pop this grain out. What I don't know though is which direction this grain's going. It could be going down, it could be going up a little bit. So if I go right down to my depth, I could chop too deep. So what I want to do is go about halfway up and then pop this grain straight off to our knife wall all the way down. Make sure that the grain's going the direction I want it to. And if it is, then I can go down to my line and continue that all the way across. If it's not, what I'll do, if it's going down, for example, and we go down to our line and it makes kind of this diagonal cut, then I'll come through this way and pare it off so that we know we're to our line. This is a really awkward way of doing it, but I'm trying to do it so you guys can see it. And just gently tap it. You can probably even push into it and it will split that grain. So we're looking like we're coming across fairly straight. It's not dipping down, it's not going up. So I can probably run this whole line without having to worry and then come back through down to our line and do the same. So when you're doing this, use caution, especially if you're using a mallet, not to really smash into it, right? We're going to our line, our chop line, but we're also we don't want to continue and risk blowing that out by really smacking it home. You're going with the grain in this case. You're essentially splitting the wood. So you don't need a ton of force here. You can even go halfway and lift up and finish that crack if you're not confident in your hammering. All right, so we've got our 1/2 inch groove or rabbet, whatever, tenon is now chopped and cut. First thing we're gonna do now, we're gonna try to offer it into our dado and see how the fit feels before we trim anything else off. All right, so we've got our side down here. We're gonna offer it up to the groove, right? And if you can see right here, it's just a hair too big. So it's not seating in the groove the way we want. I can't even really get it to start with a little bit of bumping. So it's just a little bit too big. We need to shave off just a hair. So a couple of different options of how we can handle that. We can come through with our chisel now and we can gently start to pear cut this down a little bit. With our chisel, if we get too far, we can kind of, on this edge, we can kind of come through on an edge, just trying to register the flat bottom side of our chisel. We can do that. Or we can come through with our router plane and really start to refine that edge a little bit better as well. So you're just gonna keep repeating this process of trimming. If you got a little, trim a little on this side, trim a little on this side, shave a little bit off on that side, and keep this process up and keep trying to fit it until you get a nice firm fit. You don't want it too tight where you really have to just smash it home. It's putting too much pressure. You want it a little bit. You want it to be firm enough that it presses in firmly and not slopping around in there loose, but not too tight to the point where it's putting too much pressure and it's going to wind up splitting something. And here we have it, a nice, tight, perfect fit. I can even lift this up. It's being supported under its own weight. There you go. Being supported under its entire weight. It's in there tight enough that it's holding itself on, but it's not too tight. Just a few love taps, and we're nice and square to our face side. Looking good. So now we just got to do this on the other side, and we've got a bookcase almost. We've got all three shelves in. I've just got it loosely kind of clamped up right now, but we're dead square from the shelf to the sides. Everything is looking good. The only thing we have left now is just our support pieces underneath and then do the top, and then we'll have ourselves a bookcase, but we're starting to look like a bookcase. So next what we want to do is support our shelves. So we need these support pieces to work on. It's essentially the same process as the shelves. We're going to cut that 1/2-inch rabbet in there to fit in, and we're going to put the remaining stock to the back. So that way we have a nice 1-inch reveal here, a nice flush cut, and we'll just put all of our remaining stock to the back. That way it still looks, we don't have to worry about thicknessing this wood. It would be the same look as the shelf, just the 1-inch reveal from the front. All right, so to make these support pieces, they're not hard at all. It's just a piece of 3/4 inch, 1.5-inch stock. So I'm taking my shelf, my top shelf, and I'm just lining both of these sides up. Then coming down to this side of the shelf and putting a little nick mark in my stock. That's just going to make sure that this, when I cut it down, is the exact width of the shelf. Our support piece is in. Got a clamp on there just to, there's like a micro gap. I'll just close that up. And we're fitted in nicely. So we've got that one done. as well as this one. So all we have left now is just our kick plate on the bottom. So I'm not going to show the kick plate. It's the same process as the other two. It's just thicker. So I'm going to make that real quick, and then we can tear everything apart. We've got everything kind of dry fitted right now, minus the top. We're going to do that last, but I've got to tear everything apart after that and cut the rabbets for our plywood back. So I've got all the shelves in. I got a couple of clamps on, and I've made sure that all the shelves are seated fully to the front, right? So next what we need to do is cut rabbets in the sides of our bookcase so that we can recess in a plywood back flush to the back of our shelves. If you remember, we cut the shelves a 1/2 inch short from the outside of the case so that we could recess that plywood. So with all of the shelves in and fully seated to the front of the dados, I'm just going to come in the back here and put a knife mark on all of the shelves and mark where I need to cut the rabbet down to. We still have to do the top, but I want to do the top after we do an initial glue up. I don't want to glue everything together. I don't know, this might be a mistake, it might not be, but I want to get the structure of the case glued up first. That way I don't have to be contending with getting the shelves in, getting the top on, figuring out clamps in all different directions. I'm going to glue up the actual shelves and everything first, and then I'll put the top on, and then I'll put the back in just to secure everything. Is the plan. I don't know, that might change. We'll see. But as of now, I'm going to get all this tore apart. Something I didn't mention before, when you're cutting your shelves or everything else, label them. So you're still fit for each dado. Even though we cut every dado to be exactly a 1/2 inch, those shelves are fit exactly to that dado in a certain direction, right? So number them. What I do on the side is label A on the side of the shelf, and then I'll put an A inside of the dado, B, B, C, C, all the way down. That way you don't lose what shelf goes to what. All right, so what I've done here is I've just clamped a piece of machined plywood, which we know has a fairly straight edge to it. Since I don't have a straight edge guaranteed to be long enough, what I did was I just lined it up with the edges of our knife marks here and here and here, and then I put a clamp on both sides just to kind of give me a straight edge to follow. Then I'm going to go through with my marking knife and real gently run my line. Now, if you've been following along and you're working on this and all you have is a chisel, you can do this the same way everything else was done. You can run your line, you can get your chisel and do those relief cuts, make a chisel wall all the way down, and then you can flip this piece over and go a 1/2 inch over or down to, you can go halfway down to the depth of the dados. So you can do that the same way. You can use the router plane and come in here and use this as your registration service and clear this all out. Or you could use a rabbet plane. Let me introduce you to the biggest pain in the ass plane that was ever made. The rabbeting plane. Now this is an off-brand, it's not a Stanley, it's called a Faithful. And what this plane does is cuts rabbets in things. It is a pain in the ass to set up, but essentially here's the gist of it. It has a sliding fence on the side that you ride along the side of your piece of wood, and that makes sure that the blade goes the depth that you want in the cut. On the side here, there is a depth stop that makes sure that you don't go too deep, right? When you start riding on this, that means you're down to your depth. There is underneath here, there's a little screw here with a little wheel on it, a little blade. That's your scoring knife that cuts the wood before the plane blade hits it so that you don't get a shit ton of tear out. And then finally, on the front here is your blade. It acts like a normal plane blade, but it's a little bit narrower. This one is probably 1.5 inches wide. And it is made to run along the piece of wood and cut your rabbet. Unfortunately, the thing gets clogged constantly, especially in here. As it cuts wood, it's supposed to eject the wood out of here, the shavings out of there. They get clogged up in there constantly, so you're constantly stopping. And then something about the vibration of this plane, for some reason, this cap and the blade become loose all the time, and then you're resetting it. So you're constantly resetting it, checking your depth, getting your blade in order to get this to work. I don't know that there's a better option out there. This does work much faster than the chisel method or the previous method, but it's just kind of a pain in the ass. So I'll show you how to do it. What you do is once you get everything set up to where you want it, you don't start at the other side like you normally would with a hand plane. You start at your end and you make a couple passes like that. And as you make your cut, you start to move back, right? Making sure that your fence is riding along the piece of the wood and you're making your appropriate cut. So we're going to do this now along the whole length of this board until we get down to our halfway depth. And that will be how we cut our rabbet for this. So let's get into it. All right, so I've been sitting here for the last 20 minutes trying to think of a reason not to glue up the bottom case. I can't think of one, which means I think I've done everything I need to do to get ready to glue it up. But we're not going to do that today. We're going to do that on the next episode. So if you do not want to miss that one, subscribe down below, give me the thumbs up and comment. Click the bell when you subscribe so that you don't miss that next video when we glue this thing up and start working on the top. So with that all being said, I'll see you on the next one.